Hi, program coordinators. My name is Elizabeth Giddens, and I'm Director of Accreditation and Policy here at UNT Dallas. And I wanted to give you this presentation for a proposal for a new core curriculum assessment process at UNTD. I gave a presentation to maybe about 10 or so program coordinators on November 1st, 2019. And because I wasn't able to get together with all of you, I was going to create a second meeting, but we still couldn't seem to get together at the same time. So what I decided to do instead is to create this video. That way you could view it as your leisure and then give me feedback after you've had time to watch it. So this is a proposal for a new core assessment process at UNT Dallas. So why do we need this proposal? Why am I asking about this? Well, both the Coordinating Board and SAC-COC require that our core curriculum is to be assessed. Also, of course, it's a great way for us to measure the effectiveness of our curriculum and our students' learning in order for us to make improvements. So here are some coordinating board requirements. So the first one is that assessment efforts should be coordinated across the campus and organized by core objective. And as you know, these are the different core objectives in our Texas core curriculum, and I'll refresh you with the chart that shows the FCAs and the core objectives here in a couple minutes. The second requirement is that the UNT Dallas Core Curriculum Committee develops a strategy for implementing and standardizing appropriate assessments, rubrics, benchmarks, and targets and measures, both direct and indirect, to generalize the process and findings across the campus. The third one is that we develop a protocol that includes reflection and feedback of the assessment process. Many institutions have a calendar of when assessment results are reviewed, organized by the core objective. So for example, 2 core objectives could be analyzed each year, so each core objective would be reviewed every 3 years or so. Many institutions also have a procedure for analyzing a sample of their students' work, not the whole student body. And then minutes regarding changes faculty make based on the findings and analysis are kept to explain the continuous improvement process. And then the fourth requirement is that we focus efforts on coordinating, aggregating, and synthesizing data in the assessment process appropriately in the courses and across the campus. So I know that's a lot to take in, but this presentation is going to go through all of those recommendations and requirements. So I'm going to break it into little pieces so it sounds more manageable and it also just makes more sense. Now, you should also know that SAC-COC requires core curriculum assessment, but Texas has done well in aligning its requirements to SAC-COC requirements. So the Texas core curriculum assessment requirements that we just went over were established with the idea that institutions could use the Texas report that we have to turn in for the coordinating board to also satisfy SAC-COC, which is Principle 8.2.b. So thus, compliance with THECB should mean compliance with SAC-COC. So this is a chart that you're probably familiar with. Here are the foundational component areas. So this is what the students look at in terms of what classes they need to take for these particular component areas. And then these are the core objectives or the learning outcomes that are supposed to exist in each of these foundational component areas. And the ones that are circled in or bubbled in, those are the core objectives that are to exist in the particular classes that are in these foundational component areas. So I've said a lot. Where do we start? So my first recommendation is that we start with the shared governance, so reorganizing that. So I propose that we reorganize the core curriculum committee with one faculty member to represent each foundational component area and core objective. So we'd have one faculty area for these, one faculty area for these. Instead, it's currently organized by LAS programs and representatives from other schools. So I instead recommend that we organize it around how the core curriculum is built, the FCAs and the core objectives. Then, after we decide our membership, we would form 2 subcommittees, one focused on the approval of new courses and then one focused on the assessment process. And that's kind of how we're set up now. We have a core curriculum committee that does the approval of new courses, and then we have a smaller subcommittee that does the assessment process, but I just recommend that we formalize it into these 2 subcommittees. So next, those 4 recommendations that the coordinating board has written out, recommendations 1 through 3 are about institution-wide assessment. So for the entire institution, all the core curriculum classes. And then also they require course level assessment. So we'll talk about this in a bit. The majority of the presentation is going to be on this institution-wide assessment. So let's go ahead and get into that now. So The process that I'm recommending for assessing the core objectives for institution-wide data is in 5 steps. So first, I recommend that we identify the artifacts, aka the assignments that measure each core objective. Then the next step is that we need to adopt particular rubrics that are the same and do training on those rubrics. So I recommend that be our second step. The third step is implement the process. So we're using the assignments and we are utilizing the rubrics to be able to assess our students. So that's what it means by implement. And then I obtain access to the data. Number 4 is managing the logistics about how the assessment process is going to work. And then 5 is actually conducting the assessment. So I'm going to go through all 5 steps right now. So the first step, identifying the artifacts. So in spring 2020, I will ask the faculty what assignment or series of assignments in your course assesses the student's ability to do the core objective. And again, these are the 6 core objectives in the Texas core curriculum. So I will simply send out an email to the faculty teaching these classes to ask them, what are the assignments that you're using to assess the student's ability to do the core objective? That's step 1. Step 2. In spring 2020, I would support the assessment subcommittee of the core curriculum with the adoption of uniform, valid assessment of learning in undergraduate education. Those are called the value rubrics. And we would decide desired targets for each core objective to measure the direct learning. And these value rubrics, if you haven't heard of them, they were created by faculty committees of the Association of American Colleges and Universities, so AAC&U. They're used across the United States. Many institutions use them to assess their core curriculum. So they would be great rubrics for us to adopt and utilize here at UNT Dallas. Also during spring 2020, I would provide mass training on those value rubrics and how they align with the core objectives, and provide one-to-one consultations about aligning assignments to the value rubrics. So if any of these assignments during the identification process during step 1 maybe needed to be tweaked a bit to be able to align to the rubric, or maybe the faculty member just had some questions about how do I use this rubric to be able to assess my students' work with this assignment, I can provide some one-on-one consultations and also some mass training on that. Okay, so step 3. So step 1 and 2, as you saw, was in spring 2020, so that's still this academic year. Step 3 is occurring next year, so it's an academic year 2021. So this is when we implement it. This is when we require that faculty who are teaching in the core use these value rubrics when they are assessing their students. So that would be in the fall and spring. And at that time, next year, I would also be obtaining access to the data. So I'd figure out a mechanism for gathering data in one place and in one standardized way, maybe through Microsoft Teams. You might have heard me talk about how I proposed for assessment software for UNT Dallas to purchase. It was not funded, unfortunately, for fiscal year 2020. I'll try again next year. But for this coming year, I still want to keep moving forward, and so I would just need to figure out a way that we are going to still be able to get access to the data. There are other ways besides having a software system. Maybe Microsoft Teams might be that. So I'm just going to have to figure out that, but that would be something that I would work on at the same time that the value rubrics were being implemented and used in the assessing of the assignments by the faculty member. Okay, step 4. So this is the logistics. So at this point, I would be preparing for an assessment summit. So I would be identifying faculty, or the core curriculum committee would be identifying faculty to participate in assessment. And we would randomly select artifacts with redacted student names for an appropriate sample size, set up electronic access, and then assign artifacts. So the artifacts are to be read by one faculty in addition to the course instructor. So the course instructor would have already read the assignment or graded the assignment with the rubric, and then we need one additional faculty member to also look at that assignment with the rubric. And this is for inter-rater reliability purposes. Now, if there was a point discrepancy of 1 or more, we would assign a third faculty member to be the rater as well. So this step 4 is, again, the logistics. It's preparing for an assessment summit, which is step 5. I'll go to step 5 in a second. This is an example of what it might look like in terms of who's reading, who's looking at these assignments, and to be able to assess them. So step 5 would be an assessment summit where faculty members would come in and actually read artifacts. This is what it might look like when you sat down at a computer. You would have different artifacts in front of you as a computer file. The first reader, that would be the faculty member who already looked at it. You would be the second reader, and then if necessary, a third reader would be assigned. So the first reader is the instructor of the course, the second is a summer faculty participating in this assessment summit, and then the third is another summer reader if needed. And I'll explain this part in regards to the summer assessment process in a second. But you would essentially have kind of a checklist of what you need to do when you get to this assessment summit. Okay, so let's talk about that assessment summit now. So I'm recommending that 2.5 days over the summer that we have a core assessment summit, and the proposed schedule is here. So I would gather faculty, or the core assessment committee would gather faculty to read and rate artifacts in late May 2021. Again, because this is something that would be implemented starting in academic year 2021. So the first time we would actually have data to review would be at the end of 2021. So in late May. For $750, we would gather faculty to, and this would include lunch, coffee, and snacks throughout the days. But so day 1, what it would look like, maybe on a Monday from 9 to 12, I'd go over directions and review some artifacts with the rubric together. So that way we're all utilizing the rubric in the same way when we are conducting our assessments. We would break for lunch from 12 to 1, and then Monday again, faculty would read and rate student artifacts. So the morning is about directions, then we would have lunch, and then 1 through 5 on Monday, that's when you really kind of get into the assessment process. You get into that check sheet that you would have when you get there. Day 2 is Tuesday, so from 9 to 5 all day, what you would be doing is just reading and rating student artifacts. You would have another checklist for your second day, and you would just go through all of them. You'd, of course, have a break for lunch. Day 3, Wednesday, faculty would not report on this day, so I and SAR office, Strategic Analysis and Reporting Office, will work together to collate the data. And then day 4, which is Thursday, what we would do is after the data is collated, we would get back together, the faculty would come back to campus, and we would discuss the findings and report out. So we're going to discuss what do we see? What improvements does UNT Dallas need to make in terms of institution-wide support for our students? And then at noon, you would be dismissed. So this is a 2.5-day summit. Full day here, nothing there, half day here. This is maybe what it would look like. You would just come and sit in a computer lab, and then, but don't forget there would be food, and of course you would also be paid. This is what this is a recommended calendar. You might remember from earlier in this presentation, one of the recommendations or requirements of the coordinating board was to have a calendar to ensure that the core objectives are being reviewed on a cyclical basis. But also, it doesn't need to be overwhelming. So we don't have to review all the core objectives in one year. We can divide it out. So this is a recommended assessment calendar. So during the first implementation of it, 2021, I would recommend that the assignments that we are reviewing are critical thinking assignments, and that's the rubric we're using. The next year, we're going to be looking at social responsibility and teamwork. And so that's when we'd be utilizing that report that we had created. And then during the third year, that's when we're actually utilizing the information from the report and making improvements. So at that same time, we're assessing new core objectives, reporting on the ones that we had done the previous year, etc. So you can see, follow the color board. So prior to each core objectives assessment year, so prior to this year, what I would be doing is I would be contacting each instructor who must assess to confirm that their assignment for that core objective, based on what they had submitted with their Texas Core Curriculum application to begin with, I would make sure that they have that. I would confirm it with them. I would talk to them, again, one-on-one consultations to see if we need to make any edits to better align to the value rubric. I would remind them that they do need to utilize the agreed upon value rubric and provide training on that. And then also I would provide training on how to submit materials electronically. So for this first year, we're going to have to use something else besides an official assessment software system, maybe Microsoft Teams or something. But, hopefully we'll get an assessment software later in the future. But I would provide training on how we're going to submit those materials. Okay, so how many faculty and how many artifacts need to be part of this process? So only a sample is required. We don't need to look at all of our students' data in terms of the assessment summit. So this right here is looking at the 1819 catalog. Here are how many courses per FCA that we have. Now, you'll remember from that chart that I brought up at the beginning of this presentation that core objectives are assigned to FCAs. So next what I did is I made this blue table. And so critical thinking is in every single foundational component area. So it's in 52 classes. Social responsibility is in 29, teamwork 20, communication 52, personal responsibility 22, empirical quantitative skills 25. So these are the number of classes per core objective. While these are the number of classes per FCA, these are the number of classes per core objective. And remember that the assessment is around the core objective. So how would we determine our sample? How many artifacts do we need to be looking at? How many faculty need to be involved in this process? So per SAR, or Strategic Analysis and Reporting Office, the average class has 22 students enrolled in it. So per the calendar, we would look at roughly 50 core objective classes per year. So this is the calendar. So the ones that have a lot of classes, this one, for example, critical thinking and communication, they're in all of the classes. Those would be on their own. You see, critical thinking is done on their own, communication is done on their own. And then the other ones I put together. So social responsibility and teamwork I put into 1 year. Personal responsibility, empirical and quantitative skills I put into 1 year. So roughly 50 core objective classes per year. So there might be multiple sections, but we could look at one section per one class. So thus 50 times 22 is 1,100 artifacts, and that serves as our population number. So we would only need to look at a sample of those though. So with a confidence level of 95% and a margin of error of 5%, an appropriate sample size would be 285 artifacts or assignments. So based on this, we could be 95% confident that our results would be plus or minus 5 points had we looked at the entire population of 1,100 artifacts. So 285 artifacts divided by 2 days is 143 artifacts a day needed to be reviewed. So if each faculty does 18 a day, 8 faculty are needed. So 8 faculty times $750 is $6,000 depending on core assessment per year. And I came up with this $750 because it's $250 a day. And as an FYI, UT Arlington pays $200 a day. So it's a little bit above what they pay. And I would request this money for fiscal year 2021. So that is how big this process is. It shows, this is a big initiative and an undertaking. However, it is something that is reasonable and something that we can accomplish. So let's talk about who those 8 faculty would be. So this slide has changed each time that I've presented this presentation to the different stakeholders that were on the very first slide that I've already presented this to. So who would be the 8 faculty? So far, the recommendations is that it would be undergraduate instructors only. It would be instructors who teach in the core. Full-time faculty would get first priority to participate in the assessment summit, and then adjuncts would get second priority. Ideally, 1 from each FCA would be in the room. And another recommendation is that they should not be members of the core curriculum committee. And then how would the sample artifacts be representative? So we would use a cluster sampling method, and we would ensure that freshmen, sophomore transfers, as well as male, females, race demographics, and then courses amongst the school divisions are all included in this sample of artifacts. In addition to the FCA courses, we would include the CAOA courses too. And if you need a reminder of what the CAOA or courses are, you're welcome to remind me. It's a category of the core curriculum a category of the core curriculum which allows for a little bit more flexibility than the traditional FCA categories. Okay, so you might remember that day 3 here is when, that day 4 is when we're discussing findings and reporting out. So there's a typo here that should say day 4. So this is when SAR and I got together and we collated the data, and then we need to come back together on day 4 and we need to talk about what are we going to do to improve. So these are some prompts that we could talk about during that discussion session. So what have you observed about the achievement of the core objective? What are some areas of strengths? What are some areas that we need to improve in? To what extent was the core objective addressed in the artifact? What recommendations would you make to your faculty colleagues regarding improvement of the core objective? What recommendations would you make institution-wide for improving this core objective for all students at UNT Dallas? And then also, do you have any recommendations for improving this assessment process, this assessment summit? So these questions, and just by having a discussion and utilizing the data and looking at what we need to improve institution-wide, this will become our report. We can use this minutes from this meeting, and we can be able to use our recommendations to be able to show that we are using data for continuous improvement. So next, once we have our recommendations, we would disseminate them to appropriate bodies. So our shared governance system, that's when we would tap them in. So we would provide that report to the core curriculum committee, academic council, maybe program coordinators, deans, faculty alliance, the faculty teaching the courses. So this is when we need change to get really embedded and continuous improvement to occur. So this is kind of the action item for things to actually happen from our recommendations. I would keep track, as Director of Accreditation Policy, I would keep track of the closing the loop. So I would keep track of any sort of recommendations that came out of this and any action that occurred from these bodies of our shared governance system. That's what I would use and keep track of to close the loop, to show that we are using data for our improvement and making changes to the institution based on that data. So far, all we've been doing is talking about direct assessment. So direct assessment is assessment that directly measures the student's learning, right? We're looking directly at those artifacts, those assignments that the students touched, that they did to show that they were learning. Indirect data is also an important part of the assessment process, and it's not an assessment process that directly measures the student's learning. Instead, it indirectly measures their learning. So some ideas for indirect data. I didn't focus on this too much during this presentation because the direct assessment is what requires more time consuming. But for the indirect data, which is also required by the coordinating board and SAC-COC, what my recommendation is, during spring, I would work with the core curriculum committee on the adoption of a survey to measure indirect learning for each core objective. These are some examples of published instruments which we could adopt: NESI, CAT, CLA, or a homegrown instrument we could adopt. These are surveys that go out to different students. So once we decided which we wanted, Giddens would request the funding from UBAC in spring 2020 for fiscal year 2021. So we've talked about institution-wide. We just talked about that. Now we need to talk about course levels. So this is just for one course. So this is institution-wide, is gathering all the data to be able to make changes on an institution-wide basis. Course level is more on the micro level. So it's how does one instructor use the data from his or her class to be able to make changes to that particular course. So even though the core objective might not be on the calendar for that particular year, instructors are required to assess via those rubrics every single semester that they have that class. So each semester, I would ask the instructors to analyze their data and provide a write-up of how they plan to improve data improve based on that data. So that would be essentially what's called the close the loop report. So at the end of each semester in December and May, I would send out this survey to faculty teaching particular courses, ask them how they use the data from the value rubrics to make a change in their particular course. So this would we covered the macro, that was a big part of this discussion, and now this is covering the micro assessment. So I know this is a video, so you're not here to ask questions, but I want to go over some frequently asked questions that have come about during the previous times that I've made this presentation, because there might be things you're thinking about, and if you have additional questions, please email me and I can answer them. So this next couple of slides goes over some questions that have been asked. So one question is someone brought up, we may need more money in the budget for a third reader if we have that point discrepancy, and my answer is yes, possibly. Another question, should we allow instructors who don't teach in the core to be part of this assessment process? The group so far that I presented to thought no, and so that's why they were not part of that. On this slide where I talked about what faculty would participate in this process, they weren't part of that slide. Should we allow faculty adjuncts? UTA doesn't, but I think we could if they're the ones that teach a lot in the core. This is why on that particular slide it was changed to full-time faculty get first priority, but if there's not enough full-time faculty that are interested in being part of the assessment summit, then the part-time faculty or the faculty adjuncts, we would open it up for them. What percent of UNT Dallas core classes are taught by adjuncts? I'm not sure. So I put in a request to SAR. They don't know, but they're asking HR at System. So to be determined. I will keep you updated. Should we pilot this process? Possibly. UTA did. And then how do we assess oral communication and teamwork during the summer summit? So UTA assesses teamwork with papers about how the teamwork process went, what they learned. Thus, they put requirements of the signature assignments allowed. That way that they can utilize those assignments to assess the teamwork properly. And then the staff member who I talked to at UTA couldn't speak for oral communication because they have not been employed at UTA since they've done that one. But they recommended video recording or having a sit-in. As I explained, this process that Texas requires is also aligned to SAC-COC. So another school called Old Dominion University, and they're in Virginia, they do a very similar process to this. And they do a sit-in. So instead of having an assessment summit, what they do is they assess oral communication throughout the year, and they do a sit-in. So they just have, while that student is doing a presentation, they have an additional faculty member go in and sit in on that presentation and also utilize the rubric and judge their work at that time live. Okay, some more questions. The communication FCA includes oral, written, and visual. Do we need a rubric for each one? So UTA edited the value rubric to include more of these, and they have it up on their website. We could do the same. So we only have one communication rubric. That would probably be in our best interests. Next question, even during non-assessment years, according to the calendar, do faculty still have to assess? Yes, this is mandatory. Also, they must submit a report on closing the loop. So this, already talked about this on a previous slide. It's also required as part of the coordinating board's recommendation 4. And then some other helpful that UTA and Texas Tech provided me with when I was doing research for this process is they said maybe have the summit off campus for a more captive audience, perhaps do it twice a year, once in the summer and once in the winter. For initial baseline data, since we won't have targets to be able to create since we don't have any baseline data, they recommend utilizing the value rubrics and utilizing the data that nationwide is there for us to be able to create our targets. Perhaps have each course reapply to the core. So to ensure that our classes are not getting to ensure that our classes are always having assignments in them that align to the core objectives and they don't ever get watered down, we could require that courses reapply to the core maybe every 3 years or something like that to ensure that the syllabus and the assignments and the core objectives are all still well aligned. And then the last one is have a close-the-loop report for the course data to ensure assessment is happening even when the core objective is not on the schedule or the calendar. And we've already talked about that now. FYI, El Centro does this same process, as does Old Dominion University in Virginia. The Old Dominion University in Virginia has given several presentations on it at SAC-COC, which has been, in their presentations have been very very great. These are some questions that have come up. If you have more questions, please email me. You might be wondering why UTA and Texas Tech. Well, before I embarked on this process and brainstorming it, I asked the coordinating board who's doing really well at this right now, and they're the ones that recommended UTA and Texas Tech. So I started with their websites, and then I talked to staff members at those institutions to be able to kind of get me started and get some of these questions answered that I've been asked. So thank you so much. If you have questions or comments, please email me or stop by my office. I'm in Founders Hall 300C. So once I hear back from you, I think I'm going to email you guys a deadline to be able to hear back by. That way we can keep the progress rolling. So once I hear back from you in regards to any changes you think need to be made, I would like to bring this to the Institutional Effectiveness Committee. After them, I'd like to bring it to Academic Council and then a presentation to Faculty Alliance. So I just want to ensure that this is a well communicated process and a proposal, and that we really tap into our shared governance system. So thank you so much and have a great day.